Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's special selection comes at us from Oystein. You've been going way too fast. You need to slow down and meditate on your sins. So, I take it we're in store for some doom metal, possibly talking about slowing down, and I mean that's definitely a metal logo, right? You're not going to try to convince me that that's, I don't know, a pop album or something. A Reverie, Midsummer's Dying by the band Profetus. Let's dive in, see what they're bringing to the table today. As usual, I gotta know the tempo of this. We're about 40 BPM right here. This is slow, and I may even be a little off. It's really tough to anticipate all of these hits when there's just so much room between them. I'd say we're somewhere between like 37 and 42 though, easily. It's slow, right? That's honestly all we need to know about it. The organ is a nice touch though. The vocals are wild too. I mean, I guess technically we would classify that as a growl, but it almost sounds like pure rasp. It's wild. Feedback is an interesting touch in this section too. Is that an acoustic guitar? I can hear strings being hit, but it's a bit it's tucked into the mix. I can't tell if it's an acoustic guitar or maybe a harp. I think it's a guitar. Much like the organ, it's a nice little addition to it. It doesn't really change much of what they're doing with the metallic side. It's just nice to have a different timbre in the mix though. The first riff. Okay. A little bit of rhythmic inconsistency, but they're really spot on for a lot of this. It's quite impressive to find that sort of rhythmic consistency within an entire group of a tempo this slow, particularly in death metal. Sorry, doom metal. Although, you know what? We might be in funeral doom metal. It just kind of dawned on me. A lot of this sounds like someone passed away, but also the ridiculous tempo. Doom metal can be up to like 50, 60, but when we get to the 30s, I think we typically get into funeral doom area. Kind of curious what the slowest a doom metal band has ever played at. I don't think we've had anything lower than like 33 BPM on the channel before. And honestly, once we get into the 20s, I think it'd even be difficult to understand it as a song. There'd be so much space between each beat. Oh, we've actually sped this up a little bit. Yeah, we're about 45 here. I just realized that bumping it up 5 BPM in most cases isn't that big, but here we have like a 12% increase. Yeah, I mean, what do I say about this? There's definitely some cool stuff going on, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's doom metal, and not just any doom metal. This is slow. Like I mentioned, high 30s, maybe 40, 41 BPM. I mean, we're only a little above one beat every 2 seconds. Because that would be 30 BPM. And it just, there's not a lot of room for the song to progress at any sort of pace. We end up with one 4 bar riff that we listen to for almost 3.5 minutes at the beginning of the song, because that's how long it takes to get through the verse. As with a lot of doom metal, if we actually brought this up to a traditional speed, I'm talking even just bumping it up to 60, 70 BPMs, which is still on the slower side when you look at the general speed of music. Uh, I mean, you're talking about cutting this song in half down to a 5 minute track. So it's it's so difficult for me to talk about doom metal, uh, especially stuff like this. And I don't want to rag on this in particular. This is something that I've run into a bit with doom metal in the past. It just doesn't do anything on the technical side. This song has one riff that takes up like 60% of the track, which, on your average rock song that maybe gets radio play, yeah, it's pretty similar there too. The difference is, though, is that one riff, you're going to hear it for a cumulative minute and a half or something out of your barely 3 minute song. But here, we listen to it for almost 6 minutes of this. I get tired of that kind of stuff. um, the drums, there's not really much to write home about here either. Honestly, what I find most interesting about drum work in doom metal, and I didn't even have this click up until right now, the drums are technically the metronome. They give us the beat, right? But in other forms of metal, there's usually flourish to that as well. Maybe you'll have a snare on 2 and 4, but you'll have some bass work, some bass kick work, or some cymbal work to dance around that and create syncopation to create the drum pattern rather than just being a metronome on every hit. Even when we talk about, death metal and black metal with blast beats and 16th notes, that's still putting a lot of attacks within the space of one beat. This, though, in a lot of ways, the drummer is just the metronome. It might change up every once in a while. Maybe we have snare on 2 and 4, or snare on only 2, or only 4, or only 1, or 3, whatever. Um, and then, other hits we might get a hi hat or a crash cymbal or maybe a bass kick. But the drummer primarily gives us quarter note attacks. What instrument we hear on each beat, that changes. But what they're doing as far as rhythmically, really not a lot of change to that. But unlike a metronome and unlike other bands who might do something similar of just give us, constant quarter note hits on the drum kit, at this tempo, there's inconsistencies to the drum hit. And without the drummer leading us, giving us hits between the beats, and actually no instrument really gives us hits between the beats, it doesn't do the job of a metronome, which is to help keep time, the consistency of rhythm here. Yeah, that's never clicked with me. I think that's one thing that kind of makes it bizarre to me, is that rhythmically, doom metal like this, they keep their rhythms in the realm of being a metronome. You really don't get anything faster than per beat. Sometimes you'll hold it out for 2, 3, 4 beats, but you're never going to get hits between beats. There's no syncopation. There's not really the concept of eighth notes or 16th notes. The fastest you're going to get is quarter notes, one per beat. And so you have this boringness of the metronomic style of rhythmic consistency, but you don't have the temporal consistency that comes with playing like a metronome. It's kind of the two worst parts of this thing. Usually, the element of playing boringly with your rhythms is to have rhythmic consistency or temporal consistency, and it doesn't have that, but it's also boring rhythms. It's like two things I dislike most about this all comes down to the rhythmic elements and sort of its oddity in how death metal looks at it. I think it's one of the things that are doom metal. Sorry, I think it's one of the things that kind of makes funeral doom in particular bounce off of me so hard. I mean, sure, it can be a stagnating style of music and it can drag on for long periods of time, but I think it does the two biggest rhythmic sins I can think of simultaneously. Um, and they're personal sins. I wouldn't say that this makes music bad or that this is bad drum work, that these are just like blanket sins of what no rhythmic player should be doing. No, it's just like personal things I dislike in rhythmic parts, and they're two really big ones. And a lot of funeral doom that y'all have introduced me to. I'll be honest, I have not listened to any funeral doom on my own. So just what we've checked out on the channel so far kind of bounces off of me because of this consistent showcasing of how they approach the rhythmic concept of the composition. But there's more to doom metal than rhythms and inconsistent timing. In fact, those I would say are kind of a part of it. The inconsistent timing of everything sort of helps create this fluidity of performance, and it's actually something I have praised on occasion. Not necessarily something that I've liked, but has added to a key part of doom metal. Atmosphere. This song has fantastic atmosphere. The chords that the guitars give us, the heavy weight, the distance between each individual hit and chord, um, and even, again, sort of this phasing of time. There are plenty of places in here, although less than I expected, but plenty of places where the guitars, the drums, the vocals are going to come in all on the same beat, but slightly out of time with each other, some a little earlier, some a little later. It doesn't really bother me that much. I don't know if I'm just acclimating to what Doom does, if I just expect it now. It's still not something I enjoy in my mind, but like in my gut, it's starting to feel right for this genre. But it all creates this plodding atmosphere, just this dragging of the feet, this massive weight being pulled behind you, and each step being a monumental task. It both feels lethargic but also weary. It works. I think that is one of the things I can say about funeral doom metal in particular. It's not my cup of tea, but these folk who are working within the genre, they create atmospheres that I think would be difficult to create any way else than this. And I think Profetus is doing a great job at this here too. But I don't think it's just because of the temporal thing. I don't think it's just because of the chords played or just because of the sounds of the instruments. Well, actually, technically, it is the sounds of the instruments, but not the ones you typically find in a metal band. I'm enjoying the expanded instrumentation here. The organ makes sense for Funeral Doom. The organ's always sort of had a darker feeling to it. But I think the acoustic guitar that we heard for a couple of minutes towards the back half of the track was a nice little touch as well. Both of them added a bit of, I don't know, character to the song. I don't know what they represent. I mean, the organ just feels doomy. It just feels gloomy. It has this air of, well, even I'd say a deathy element to it, an afterlife element to it that works very well with the funeral concept that they have going on here. But the acoustic guitar actually feels grounded and alive in an interesting way that, assuming that this song might have something to do with death thematically, presents a sort of alternate to that, a liveliness to the song that I found to be an interesting contrast compared to the guitars, the drums, and the organ. I do think it was interesting too. We didn't have the organ with the acoustic guitar initially. The organ came in afterwards. And not long after the organ came in, the acoustic guitar was taken out of the mix too. It's almost as if the the liveliness and the gloominess weren't allowed to commingle. They existed momentarily, and then the liveliness died off. So I thought that was a neat little idea there. Again, I'm not sure what any of it means thematically. It could just, hey, the organ would sound good here, and they start working on another riff. Hey, I got this acoustic guitar. Let me play this thing under it. It just sounded good to their ears. But if there was any sort of artistic reasoning behind it, I don't have much of a read. The vocals, though, they do grab me. There's something about these. It's guttural. It's kind of growly, but it's not a growl. It's almost missing the airiness of a growl. It's almost just the compression, almost like a rumble of popcorn crackling at the back of the throat. And I think that's what's most haunting about it, is that there's no breathiness to it at all. It doesn't sound like a human voice with any air support. And how do you create sound without air? That's what's the wildest thing about it. It almost sounds dead, unalive. Like how I would imagine a zombie to make a sound, like in a very scientific sense, right? How do zombies moan and brains if their lungs aren't working, if they're not breathing in? I think something along this low rumble crackle is the only thing a zombie would technically be able to make. I don't know. It kind of blows my mind. I don't know if it's all the delivery, if this person just creates this little popcorn sound in their voice and they don't support it too much and allow it to just exist as this small, almost like a whimper of static, of white noise, or if there's some production stuff that goes in. The vocals are tucked in pretty far into the mix, and maybe that's helping cover up any breathiness or airiness that the vocalist is incorporating, any sort of air that is being picked up by the vocals. But at the end of the day, you don't hear it, regardless of where that happens in the production elements, whether it's the recording, the performance, the engineering, and it creates a very specific feeling to the vocal delivery here. It's not just low effort. It's not just minimal effort. It's almost like a no effort vocal delivery, which is not a way I've described anything in the past. I mean, I've done a lot of reactions, but I don't think I've ever called a vocal style no effort, and that's what they're sort of implying here. And once again, it just works really well with this entire song. I mentioned that it feels like someone with a massive weight behind them, chained to them, and each step is just it's just draining them of energy. They can't stop. They have to keep going, and it's just a slow, meticulous crawl. And this person with no energy can barely speak, and this that's all you get out of it. That's all they can muster due to the lack of energy they have. And it just fits the atmosphere. So yeah, I think that's gonna wrap it up for my thoughts on this. Like I said, when you kind of break it down and look at individual ideas, there's not a lot going on here. It's all very much atmosphere. Now, granted, I do sort of like the structure here. We had a verse that we came back to, and then we had a second riff, and then we brought the energy down, brought that verse back, then brought the acoustic bit in, then had a new riff, and then brought that main idea back in a little bit of a subversive change to wrap the song up. It's got a nice linear but cyclical thing going on where I don't think we have a chorus, but we do have a verse that we keep returning to. And I think that's kind of neat. But there's also a lot of that verse in here. It takes up so much space that, once you've talked about that, that's the whole song. Um, so yeah, let me dive into some lyrics here, see what's going on. And I think the lyrics are about somebody on their deathbed. Or maybe a spirit? Not quite sure. The concept of death and moving on to the next state of existence, particularly one not of a spiritual rebirth or an afterlife, but of becoming one with nature again. And a return to, I don't know, an earthly energy. That's what the song seems to be about. I'm not quite sure who is, well, the narrator is, but like what their state is as they are mentioning this stuff. But it says, kindle this reverie of sheltered darkness across the water's calm eye with the bygone clasp of centuries, the pulse of waves against the rocks, swelling from the ageless shore, coiling around the endless rime like sun rays on the quiet billows. It is beautifully written, and there is no way I would have ever gotten any of this from what was sung in the song. In fact, even reading this, right, I've gotten pretty good at kind of getting harsh vocals, being able to hear words and stuff in them, but not this. And honestly, as I'm reading these lyrics, the first thought I had was there is no way that all of this fit in that song because I didn't hear somebody say half of of any sort of syllable, any sort of sound that would have filled this up. I'm curious how much of this is actually in the song. I would love to get a stem of just the vocals so I can hear them a little better, or if someone can find a way to boost the vocals in the mix, which I know is tough when you don't have the stems. So yeah, I don't know how possible it would be for me to to find this, but I'm real curious if I could hear the words with the lyrics pulled up in a vocal boosted version or just the vocals isolated. Because there's 7 stanzas here, and it's really not a lot, but it feels like a lot compared to what I heard. But, anyways, the vocabulary, the way it's written, it's very poetic, it's very beautiful. I love this. I don't really think it matches the music much at all. I guess it depends on your perspective on that. I find the music to be rather brutal. There is beauty in it, but it is beauty told through brutality. And the lyrics are sort of pure beauty. There's a darkness to the themes, what is said, but the vocabulary used almost has no grotesque element to it at all. It is very light, very flowery. So, anyways, we have this idea of it says, kindle this reverie. A reverie is just like a daydream. It says, of sheltered darkness. It says, view the pulse of the waves against the rocks, feel the swelling of the shore like sun rays on the quiet billows. Just sort of like engage with nature, right? Take this daydream and understand nature around you. It then says, kindle this epitaph, which is like something you would write on a grave. Something about the person who has passed. It says, kindle this epitaph against the quiet painting of godless nature. Breathe on the pulse of wind in the trees, evergreen shade lit by the evening stars. Once again, describing how nature is all interlocking and woven together. It says, sleep, my weary heart, deep in the warm chest of the earth. Flee, escaping the winter's white hand of death, return to the summer never ending. Now, this I don't quite get. Up to this point, I'm like, okay, this dude, he's ready to return to nature. We'll actually see a little bit more of this in I think it's the final stanza. But he says that I'm going to return to the warm chest of earth. But he says I'm going to escape winter's death and return to the summer never ending. Unless this is just the afterlife. It's not necessarily how I read all of this, though. But to escape death, to return to a never-ending warmth. There's no never-ending warmth here on Earth, unless you go live at somewhere near the equator or something. So, I mean, that's my idea here, is to escape the brutality of Earth, the physical living, and find positive, an eternal happiness in the afterlife. He says, but the birds there will weave their song on tall trees with distant hums, and the north wind ceases to carry the voices past. Alone as the eye of the night sky that cradles the gardens of stars, I'll forever return to these quiet shores as my candle fades and the twilight's gone. So this is where things kind of go over my head a little bit. I definitely get the idea that this person's passed away at this point, but this whole thing about becoming one with nature, but also possibly going to an afterlife of some sort, returning back to these shores as my candle fades. I wonder if there is some uh, religion or, I don't know, pagan ritual or something that all of this would help me understand if I understood what it was referencing. I get the general gist of this track, but it's the particulars, the details. Why are all of these things important? What is up with the candle that continuously gets brought up? At the beginning it says, kindle the quiet flame, but then we kindle a reverie, we kindle the epitaph, and eventually the candle itself fades out. Is this just a typical idea of life? A candle whose wax continues to burn until the light fades away? Or is there something more to this entire concept? I don't know. But the concept of death and moving on definitely seem to be part of this, and that lines up with the heavy weight of the song. I don't know if there's any release at the end of the track, though, as sort of is implied here. Escaping the white hands of death of winter and going to a summer that never ends, and coming back to these shores forever, almost as if this is a place of contemplation or peace for this person. And they would like to come back here, as many times as they feel they need to, despite having moved on. But it does seem like there's an element of peace lyrically that I don't quite remember hearing musically. But I think that's where my analysis of this ends. There's a lot of stuff that goes over my head, sort of musically, but definitely lyrically. Let me know what you thought of this track. These are my thoughts on Reverie from Profetus. Did you have a different interpretation? Is there anything I said that you thought needed correcting on, or maybe anything that you wanted to expand on? Maybe I touched on something but didn't quite go far enough in that direction. Put any of that and any thoughts you have down in the comments section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for today, but I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.